Yes, my name is Matthew Grau. I'm from Los Angeles. I've been in and out of this industry for the last couple of decades. I've known him for way too long. And I've worked on a lot of different properties in that time. I've worked on pretty much most of the major licenses: Star Wars, Star Trek, Marvel Superheroes, Dune, Dungeons & Dragons. Worked for a bunch of different companies as a staff as well as freelance, including Atlas, Steve Jackson Games. Done a bunch of work for Wizards of the Coast, but I never actually held a position there. So these days what I'm working on is a game called Cthulhu Tech. I work with Wildfire, who's a strategic partner of Catalyst Game Labs. Catalyst does Shadowrun and Battletech, two little games you might have heard of somewhere along the way. And Cthulhu Tech is sort of my baby these days, pushing along. It's a fusion of a little bit of anime with a dark future with Lovecraft. And so one of the things that I've gotten into over time, because part of my other job is working as a screenwriter. I've done commercial filmmaking on and off for the last decade, and I really got into structure, which is an important thing specifically when you're writing screenplays. Because you have 90 to 120 pages to communicate an epic idea. You have to hit your structure, or your beats just fall apart, your story falls apart, and everything falls flat. And so in that, I've turned to a couple of different tools, and this is actually very popular with screenwriters in Los Angeles, using what Joseph Campbell termed mythic structure, or more appropriately, the monomyth. Okay, so what I'm going to talk about today, with the time that we have, I have a much bigger series of articles that Wizards of the Coast hired me to write for Star Wars that talks about using heroes on a more grand scale, using archetypes. But we're going to talk mainly about the hero's journey today. And if we've got time, I'll go into other things. Now, this is, not a lecture. So if you guys got questions, you want to interject something, just fire away. I'm not concerned about that. I'm here for you guys. I'm here to answer your questions. I'm here to provide you with, whatever information I can on this. So I'm going to frame all of this in two ways. I'm going to frame it in terms of using this kind of structure for creating compelling role-playing scenarios. Because I'm assuming we're all role players here in one capacity or another. Okay. What kind of storytelling are you guys into?
I really don't. I haven't actually role played in many, many years.
Okay.
I'm more of a tabletop miniatures gamer.
Okay. Well, you know what? These tools will certainly apply to any metaplot arcs that you're using in terms of your universe development.
Well, yeah, I'm actually starting my own company, so this is going to help with all the background fluff.
Perfect. Yeah. All right, great. I was trying to make sure where we're targeting here. I'm also going to use as an example Star Wars. Has anybody here not seen Star Wars? Anybody not know what it is? Okay, that's why I like to use it. Because that way nobody gets confused. And also, since I was hired to write the articles for Star Wars, that helps as well. Okay, so what the monomyth is Joseph Campbell was a literary researcher. He was, if I remember correctly, an Olympiad before that. And what he did was he studied myth from all across Western civilization and discovered that regardless of time or regardless of geographic location, that there were commonalities, basic stages, a basic structure. And inside that basic structure, it speaks to all people in all times because it represents the commonality of human experience and understanding. So it's a powerful tool when used in storytelling because if our heroes meet a certain archetype and their journey has a certain structure to it, we can resonate with it going, yeah, which is, of course, why something like Star Wars, which is at best a medium-budget science fiction film in the mid-'70s, became a smash hit, and people who weren't sci-fi fans like my mother watched it 5 times because it had something that resonated in people as people. So in terms of breaking this down into a classical structure mixed with act structure. A word on structure. Structure is exactly that. It's a skeleton. Okay? It's not something to be used slavishly, but when erected, it creates something that you can hang your own flesh on, right? It gives you some place to start. It's basically turned something in from, oh my God, I have this infinite vista of storytelling or universe development to, oh, okay, if I meet these marks and I hang to this structure, now all I have to do is put my own personal, developments and creations on top of it. So as I'm going through this, don't take the stages too literally because they have some fancy names to them, and those not necessarily going to apply to you. It's, okay, well, what does this mean if I interpret it according to the kind of stories I tell or what I want to create? So, classic structure, 3-act structure, something I'm sure we've all studied in school at some point, right? Acts 1, 2, and 3. 2 is the biggest. All right, so I prefer to break it up into 4 stages. Act 2 has 2 parts. Okay, so Act 1 is obviously where we're going to start. In general, they should be about the same length, unless you're running a long-term game, like in terms of a campaign. Act 1 is not necessarily going to be as long because your characters are introduced. They're already a part of your setting, so you can breeze through some of that a little bit faster. But we're going to start like, these are new characters, this is a brand new story. How are we going to establish this? Act 1 has a couple of goals. You got to establish the who, what, when, where, and why of your story. Okay? So you've got a quarter of your story that you got to get all of that out. So you got to introduce your setting, the main characters, the plot of your story. You have to have at least pointed to any subplots. That way you've got this nice part of your story that's encapsulated that you can point to that's like, okay, this is all of our origin. Now, inside of that, you're going to have stages of the hero's journey. What's up, Owen? The step 1 is the call to adventure. Every story starts inside the hero's everyday world, okay? Because it's important for us to take a moment to experience the world of hero before, as it occurs to him, is routine, before we mess it all up and we start getting into the special world of our story. So like, for example, Luke Skywalker, Star Wars. We get a picture of him in his everyday world as the movie begins. Okay, after of course our nice hook with the Darth Vader taking Princess Leia, but he's a farm boy, right? The most adventure he gets is racing around on speeders and shooting wildlife, and we get a good picture of that. He's a moisture farmer. He has the drudgery of the everyday life. They're going about to buy droids to moisture farm on a desert planet. There's absolutely nothing spectacular about it. It's 100% everyman. Okay. However, there's something that intrudes on the hero's world during this. And that intrusion is what is going to move the hero into the special world of the story. And that's called the call to adventure. It's something the hero absolutely cannot deny. For example, Luke Skywalker, again, is out buying droids for his moisture farm. He gets R2-D2 and C-3PO. He takes them into the shed to get them oiled up and cleaned up. This is all absolute routine. Hits a button. Instantly a projection of Princess Leia. She's our call to action. Help me, Obi-Wan, you're my only hope. I mean, the call is just so obvious. It's just like, wow, okay. He can't resist, right? He's a hero, and this is just intruded on his world, and it's something that he can't resist, so now he must go with it. With Ben Kenobi, in the let's go back to the Phantom Menace, not quite as rigid on the mythic structure as the earlier ones, but nonetheless they work. So Obi-Wan's a Padawan in the first one, and his call to adventure comes when the Trade Federation tries to murder them and seize Naboo, right? And that's a pretty blatant call for his everyday world. Because his everyday world is his Padawan. You travel around with your Jedi Master, you go to trade negotiations, it's all good. Then gas, droids, mayhem. Then we move on to the refusal of the call. I know that sounds a little weird, but heroes are called to adventures that are beyond them. Okay? They're bigger than life. They're bigger than anything that they're capable of dealing with. And heroes, because they need to be something that other people relate to, right? Like, for example, Luke Skywalker is a character that we can relate to because he's a human being. Okay? You have to have that moment of, oh boy. Some heroes outright reject it. They're like, I'm not going there, and then there are story elements that force them along the way. Some heroes, the refusal of the call is just simply an acknowledgement of, wow, this is big, this is dangerous, I don't know how we're going to deal with this. Like, for example, if you're running a game, a campaign, and you've been playing for a long time, your characters are going to be accomplished, right? They're not instantly every time a threat comes up go, we can't do this. But it makes sense in terms of who they are that the characters have a moment where they sit with each other and they just connect over, wow, this is big. This is really big, and it's going to be tough. Okay, clank your tankards together, you know, tap your swords together, whatever. Okay, let's go out and do some business. With Luke Skywalker, again, pretty obvious. Ben Kenobi's like, come with me. Come with me to Alderaan. And Luke Skywalker's like, I want to, but I can't. I got a family. You know, I got to deal with everything on the planet, etc. Well, and we all know how that turns out. Stormtroopers show up, and he's got to leave. And anybody here played Knights of the Old Republic, the video games? Anybody know that storyline? So, like, we can go back to that and put this as well. Like, Revan, at the beginning of the story, only wants to rescue the Jedi captive Bastila Shan and get the hell off of Terrace and get back to business as usual. Okay, so it's not this great call of, you've got Jedi powers, you're the former Dark Lord, any of that kind of crap. It's just simply, this is your life, get the job done, go back to life. Step 3 then is supernatural aid. Okay, it doesn't have to be supernatural, but it's supernatural in terms of its timing and what it imparts. Every hero, as they begin on the path of the journey, is counseled by a mentor of some kind. The character shows up at exactly the right time to give the character exactly what they need that is going to allow them to succeed in what is ahead. At the time, it might not make a lot of sense, but later it does. Now, in Star Wars, obviously, it makes sense. Obi-Wan shows up, or Ben Kenobi shows up for Luke Skywalker. Actually, Luke unknowingly seeks him out, and then Obi-Wan begins to train him like, here's your father's lightsaber, here's how you sense the Force. All these kind of things that, as we know from the epic, is exactly what Luke Skywalker needed to survive what was coming. He never could have survived the Death Star or the attack on the Death Star later if Ben hadn't shown up at that time in that place and said, here's what you're going to need. Obi-Wan's aid in the first movie is less dramatic. Qui-Gon is basically just there to continually impart information on him. Be mindful of the Force, young Padawan. And that ultimately is what leads to him surviving in the end of the movie against Darth Maul. And ultimately, as we see through the movies, allows him to keep a cool head, obey the Jedi Code, and survive through things like the Clone Wars. So the last stage that Campbell identifies is he calls the belly of the whale. Now, it's not really a stage in the story. It's a transformation. By everything that has led the hero to the point where he crosses that first threshold, he, like Jonah being spit back out from the belly of the whale, emerges transformed. He now enters the special world of the story, and he's already a different person than he was when he started. That's going to encompass Act 1. Now, inside of those stages, you're going to be doing all of the other stuff that goes along with that Act 1. You're going to be, introducing other main characters, pointing to subplots, hinting towards the primary antagonists. Star Wars is great about that. You get a belly full of Darth Vader right off the bat. Right? You don't even have to hint at him. He's this tall, black, scary dude who rolls in and crushes somebody's throat. Okay, got it, the bad guy. You may have your bad guy be more subtle. You may only have evidence of what he's up to. Like if you're playing fantasy, the evidence might be, the corrupt sorcerer, you see evidence of his evil doing, as opposed to he shows up at the door and goes, ha ha, and you go, wow, that's the bad guy. So, again, it's however works for your story. So we've moved across the threshold, and we've moved into the special world of the story where we're going to be staying until the end of our story, whether it's a movie, your campaign, your adventure, whatever it is. So all the rules are different now. So in Act 2, there's a bunch of stuff that needs to happen. And it's the hero's uncovering different pieces of the puzzle one by one and overcoming hurdles to put himself in a position to get the Holy Grail that's going to allow him to overcome the circumstances and the threats of this story and ultimately succeed. Now, I divide Act 2 into two halves. For many people who are just starting out, Act 2 can seem like a wasteland because you've got a lot of space to fill, and it's like, well, where do I go? This structure will help keep you on track. I split it into the first half of Act 2. Blake Snyder, who was a screenwriter, sold a lot of spec scripts, called that the fun and games section of your script. Okay, that's where your character enters the special world and gets involved in all the cool stuff that goes on with it. Then you hit the midpoint scene, and I'll get to that in a minute, and we'll talk about that. And then the midpoint scene to the third act is ramping everything up so that the hero gets what the hero needs, facing the villain in the place of the villain's power so that he can ultimately confront the villain. So the first step of Act 2 encompasses quite a bit of that. It encompasses pretty much that entire what we call fun and games. And Campbell calls that the road of trials. And so the hero is in the special world and stuff starts to heat up. So while the hero has to face obstacles and challenges because this is drama, right? If the hero just floats through learning this or that or picking this item up and there's very little resistance, by the time you get into the meat of the story, the hero seems kind of lame. The hero doesn't seem like he's earned what's coming to him or her. And everything has to ratchet up. It all has to be conflict. And if you feel the urge, you can look up the 36 dramatic situations. There's a guy named Jeff Kitchen in Los Angeles who goes around lecturing on them. And it's a series of situations that you can dump into any scene that will make sure that the appropriate dramatic conflict is present for that. Now, the road to trials goes on for a while. And this is where you get to play with your story, with your setting. I mean, we go back to Star Wars, and you've got Luke Skywalker. Now, he gets starting to get trained in the Force. They travel to Alderaan, as directed by Princess Leia. So they got the hurdle of getting there. Then they attempt to find the planet. It's destroyed. Then they get captured by the Empire. Then they got to survive the capture by the Empire, and then they got to escape. So it's like they have that moment of just pause after they enter the special world where they're hanging out on the Millennium Falcon. Han Solo's imparting his own personal renegade view of the world. Obi-Wan Kenobi is saying, be mindful of the Force, put on this blaster, deflect the blaster bolts, all great. But immediately, I mean, they come out of hyperspace, beep, 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 rocks, TIE fighters, Death Moon. All right? It's just downhill fast. Revan's journey in Knights of the Old Republic is long and arduous because that's a game. It's more of an epic scope. You're dealing with the trials of 3 planets before things really heat up. So Revan goes to Tatooine and deals with the hostile Sand People. Then has to deal with the corporate greed and oppression of the Zerka Corporation on Kashyyyk. And then has to deal with the litigious détente of the Republic and the Sith on Manaan. And each planet has its own road of trials ramping up from the last until they continually catapult Revan to the conclusion. In the early movies, a little less dramatic. Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon have to go take their damaged ship to Tatooine, deal with the unfriendly locals who won't accept their currency, help young Anakin Skywalker win the pod races, and then ultimately repair their ship to leave. Okay, so that's an example of a little more laid-back version of the trials that isn't immediately life and death. It's crucial. They get transmissions from the Trade Federation that Nabooans are dying everywhere, but it is not an immediate threat to them, like, say, for example, the first Star Wars movie where it's just like the just pot keeps getting turned up all along the way. Now, in here, you're going to start to, these stories are particularly effective if you start to add in subplots. And subplots are smaller personal stories that take the focus away from the grand epic adventure to show that there are still people involved in this story. You guys ever played a game where it feels like the individual characters kind of got lost to the strategy of overcoming the grander goal? And that can be overcome by having personal subplots that are going on. And these can be anything. I mean, it's like, it could be so-and-so reconciling with family, or love subplots are delightful and common and easy to execute. They can be whatever works for what the personal basis for the characters that are involved is. For example, in A New Hope, Luke and Ben's relationship as apprentice and master and almost son and father figure evolves over the course of the story. Then in A Phantom Menace, the rescue and training of young Anakin Skywalker becomes an important element. Again, you've almost got father and son with Anakin Skywalker and Qui-Gon Jinn. In Empire Strikes Back, love affair between Leia and Han. Old Knights of the Old Republic, Revan's memories begin to return as visions, driving towards the revelation of identity. So in that case, Revan's subplot is not even a subplot that involves another person. It's Revan's quest to find himself. So questions of identity are also excellent subplots. And I'm sure after this, or right now, you could probably identify other stories that you find that. So through all this, you'll eventually reach the midpoint, which is the middle of your story. So halfway through, something happens that changes things so that the second half of Act 2 is going to be fundamentally different from the first half. It's an exciting change. We might discover that the story wasn't exactly what we thought it was, or that the drama is even more than we expected it to be. For example, or sometimes actually the midpoint is a false relief, and you're like, oh, and then things ramp up again. So for example, Luke Skywalker and his companions discover they're just trying to get out of the Death Star, right? They're just trapped, trying to survive, get out. To them, it's a big deal. Then they discover Princess Leia's on board, and they're going to kill her. So now, boom, everything changes. Now we're not going to just escape the Death Star. We're going to break back into it. We're going to go to a high security area so that we can save this girl who's about to be executed. Everything just got way more complicated and way more dangerous. If they would have just stuck to the plan of let's get the hell out of here, it probably would have gone a lot smoother. But again, not the stuff of heroes. Anakin, again, toning it down a little bit. The midpoint is Anakin wins the pod races, and Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan decide that they're going to take the boy with him. And the story changes at that point from simple mundane survival, which the first half of Act 2 was. It's all it was. Get the ship fixed, get the money, get off the planet. Just basic survival. It now changes to something of more insidious nature because now you're starting to slip down this, the slide of the Sith. Too many S's. Revan, for example, the midpoint of Knights of the Old Republic might be the destruction of the Jedi Enclave on Dantooine, who was the birthplace of the new Revan as that story exists. So their light is extinguished from the galaxy, and the predations of the Sith, take on a much more personal tone for the characters. No longer it's just, oh, there's these Sith out there and they're raping planets. It's, no, the Sith are out there, they just killed my friends and my mentors. All right, so now you're moving into the second part of Act 2. There's going to be a lot going on in this because we're really ratcheting up to Act 3 and our climax, which is going to be the dun dun dun, right? That's the big music. That's everything that we've been building towards. It's what your players are dying to get to, right? It's Mordor. It's the destruction of the Death Star. It's all the things that we iconically know as the part of the movie where we stand up and cheer. So there's a bunch of interesting things that are going to be happening to the hero over the course of this because he's going to need to still transform to be able to deal with what's ahead. Because the hero, despite all the transformation that has occurred, is really not ready. I mean, if you look at most stories, by the middle of this movie, the hero is still not ready. Still couldn't deal with it. Luke Skywalker, in the middle of Star Wars, can't deal with the Death Star and Darth Vader. If you want to go to Lord of the Rings, the middle of the Two Towers, Frodo is ill-equipped to deal with the honest-to-God trip to Mordor. Right? There's still more that has to happen to him if he's really going to follow through on it. So step 8 then is what's referred to as the mother as goddess. And one of two things might happen here. The hero may experience some kind of connection with an opposite sex figure that allows him to unite his masculine and feminine sides, or to simply mature. Okay? So masculine and feminine, we know how to define those. Masculine is the softer, nurturing side, more contemplative. The masculine side is aggressive, focused, and conquering. See, I was going with the integration that occurs here. Feminine being the nurturing and contemplative, softer energy, men being the aggressive and conquering and, let's do stuff, right? But typically more of a blunt instrument. So we're looking for the unification of that because for a hero to truly accomplish heroic goals, a hero has to be in touch with all parts of who he or she is. At this point, the hero may also experience a kind of total love that alters his world, similar to the kind of love that a child might feel from his or her mother. That's why it's called Mother of Goddess, that just pure, unadulterated, total love that an infant feels from mom. So, for example, in A New Hope, Luke Skywalker has a crush on Princess Leia that intensifies as they meet face-to-face in the Death Star's prison block. This forces him to man up in a way that character had not up until that point. Okay? It's a good thing he had no idea she was his sister. Okay? Otherwise, that would have gone really differently. In Phantom Menace, Obi-Wan Kenobi experiences a moment of pure love with Shmi Skywalker as she lets Anakin go. He's the one who's freed. She's still a slave. She can't leave, but she's like, I want you to go. I want you to have the kind of life that you will never have here. I love you. In Knights of the Old Republic, Revan experiences Alora's love for her Jedi husband, Sunry, who was kind of a bastard. He was having an affair with a dark Jedi. He was guilty of killing her in cold blood, and he got caught by the Manon authorities. And she still was, I love him, figure out a way to set him free. Okay, then we move on to Woman as Temptress. Now, this is not so much woman as temptress as it is simply temptation. Because now your hero is starting to get his business together. And so you got to tempt him. It's no fun if it's just hurdle, cool, hurdle, cool, hurdle, cool. There's got to be a moment where something comes in and says, I'm going to try to lure you off this path and make you go wrong. So temptations arrive to stray the hero from the path that might destroy him or remove him from the equation. Now, in Star Wars, it's pretty easy because since most of the heroes are Jedi, it's the dark side. Luke Skywalker has to deal with his first experience of the dark side when Darth Vader shows up. It doesn't immediately tempt him, but it certainly is the shade of things to come. With Obi-Wan Kenobi, his first true experience with the dark side is when Darth Maul speeds up over a sand dune, ignites a lightsaber, and they get into a big old duel. To Obi-Wan, There weren't any Sith. They'd been extinct for generations. What the heck is this? To him, the dark side was a philosophical conversation that occurred in the Jedi academies. Now, all of a sudden, there it is, and it's trying to kill him. So, though Obi-Wan isn't tempted immediately, Maul represents the thing against which he must be wary. Revan travels to the ancient Sith world of Korriban and experiences the pull of the dark side through the Sith Academy that he built and through all the tombs of the Dark Lords from the Sith throughout the generations. And so it's his world. He made that. I mean, the Sith made it generations ago, but as it was there, this is what it is. And it calls to him throughout that journey. Then we move on to the atonement with the Father. And this is a moment where this is the point to which the journey has been building, where the hero must confront the ultimate power in the special world. And it doesn't need to be a person. It can also be a thing or some kind of event. For example, on the Death Star, Luke must confront the overwhelming forces of the Empire as they try to escape. Because what's the big overarching villain, what's the most overarching power in Star Wars? It's the Empire. Darth Vader is individually terribly frightening, but the Empire is our gigantic, oppressive organization that is clearly evil. He also witnesses the confrontation between Ben Kenobi and Darth Vader as former apprentice exacts a decades-old vendetta. So it's happening on two levels, right? You've got the old Jedi and the old Sith fighting, and then you've got the new rebellion versus the new Empire. As Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon finally overcome the trials of Tatooine in order to get the real story afoot, Darth Maul appears without warning and attacks. He is the most dangerous foe they've ever thought, but more importantly, he represents a much bigger threat. He reveals the Sith are here. They are up to something. He wouldn't have revealed himself if it wasn't. So that's the big moment where they're like, oh my God. In Knights of the Old Republic, Revan finally finishes facing the shades and tombs of the Dark Lords of Korriban to find the star map. He now knows where the secret location of the Star Forge is. Now, because of the experience of confronting the ultimate power, death enters the picture. This is what we call apotheosis. Now, sometimes the hero is transformed through the threat of death. Sometimes the experience of another's death. Sometimes someone close to him transcends death to move on to the spirit world. Or sometimes death is represented by a lull. Sometimes it's several of the above. But in things that are epic and moving, it's always going to be, you've got Blake Snyder, again, in his book Save the Cat, refers to this as the whiff of death. Your character's got to get a sense that either they're going to die, somebody near to them that they didn't think was going to die is going to die, all that kind of business. It doesn't necessarily have to be a death. It has to be death is just palpable. It's just there. You know it. So Luke quickly becomes no stranger to death in Star Wars. Ben Kenobi dies. He is transformed. He ascends into the Force, but it's not a peaceful ascension. It's not like Ben was just hanging out, right? It's in the middle of a lightsaber duel where Darth Vader is clearly going to wipe the floors with him if he doesn't pull off a quick feat. Obi-Wan is instead of being confronted by someone's death, is confronted by a manifestation of death. It's Darth Maul. Sith tattoos, blazing lightsaber, murderous attitude. He's a blunt instrument of death, just waiting. Revan is finally confronted by his own death, or at least the death of his identity. So instead of it being a thing that died or that representation of physical death, it's death of self. Where when Revan finally discovers, oh, I used to be the Dark Lord Revan, and this identity that I've been living in is one that occurred due to amnesia. Now, we've gone through all this stuff. Something's got to come from it. You got to get some kind of reward because the things have ratcheted up for the hero to the point where the pressure cooker's on, and undoubtedly our heroes are unhappy. All right, Star Wars at this point, you've got the nice little trip back on the Millennium Falcon, and everybody looks like they just, survived Kosovo. In Lord of the Rings, I mean, you can go through that at any moment, and the heroes are just miserable. So you get the ultimate boon, step 12. You've gone through the trials. You've confronted the ultimate power. You've transformed through death. And you've earned the thing that brought you to the special world in the first place. The heroes get what they came for because now they've earned it. It's the holy grail of the setting. It's what you need for these heroes to accomplish what is there. Luke Skywalker gets what? R2-D2 and the plans to the Death Star, and also the Force. All the pieces fall into place for Obi-Wan. All that's left for him is to help the Queen Amidala return to Naboo to rescue her people from the predations of the Trade Federation. Revan discovers discovers the true location of the secret Star Forge and how to get there. Okay, so it's like you've got the piece, you're ready to go. Go. All right. Act 2 is now complete at this point. All the pieces are in place for the hero who is actually standing in a position of power to actually go and deal with the threat. Now it's time to go do it. And Act 3 is about doing it. So we're building towards the ultimate confrontation of our story. And we're also wrapping up loose ends. Because there's nothing worse than getting to the point where you're going to get to your massive climax and somebody's like, but what about this little thing out here? You're like, crap, forgot to wrap that up. So before you move into Act 3, wrap that business up in your story. Now, we're going to go on first, which was the refusal of the return, which is an interesting idea, right? We refused the call in the first place. Now we're refusing to go back. The hero's been transformed by his journey, and he might not want to go back. The exciting world, or the exciting adventure in the special world, may be so awesome, he's like, God, I got to go home. You know, now that you got the boon and you're threatening to actually vanquish the ultimate evil or antagonist, there's a moment where heroes are going to occur that at some point this is going to end. Do I want to go back to the way things were? You know, do I want to go back to being a farm boy? You know, do I want to go back to being a peasant? Do I want to go back to being a bartender? You know, whatever it is. There's a moment of... Heroes also sometimes have moments where they're like, do I want to bring back this hard-earned treasure to the world? Does the world deserve it? Star Wars is a bad example of this because it's pretty black and white, but in your stories, there may be a point where they get whatever it is that they need, their holy grail, and then they go, do people really deserve this? Is this really good for the world? So there's a moment that they're going to have pause. And again, like the refusal of the call, it's an epic story, it's an adventure. They're not going to not do it. They're just going to have a moment where it's considering it, or they will say no, but circumstances force them to fulfill their destiny, for lack of a better term. Now, in Star Wars, what happens is that characters usually aren't faced with going back to the ordinary world, right? Luke Skywalker's not going to go back to being a farm boy. It's just not going to happen. But they face being returned to their special world, the ordinary world version of the special world they're in. Luke Skywalker goes from being the hero and burgeoning Jedi Knight on the Death Star to a fighter pilot, right? He's just another dude in the Rebel Army, right? Bummer, right? He rescued the princess. He's a Jedi Knight in training. Fly this X-Wing. Okay, so I'm sure that Luke had this moment of, is this really my life now? Obi-Wan is no longer the Padawan, but he is not the intrepid adventurer who travels with Qui-Gon Jinn. Now he's a Jedi Knight. He's got to do what Jedi Knights do. Okay, cool. Again, different from where he started, but you're into the humdrum. It's looming. Revan is no longer an amnesiac soldier, but instead of being a general, like he was as a Dark Lord and commanding forces in this assault on the Star Forge, you're a Jedi Knight, go do a job. So that's how that can manifest. It's just simply your character settles into the ruck and run. Now, then we have what they call the magic flight, stage 14. So a lot of times the journey to return the boon, okay, so you've had the whole thing of, okay, this is what life is going to look like. Okay, we're going back with it. You got the Holy Grail. That return, well, you sure stirred up a hornet's nest, most likely getting it. And so that is going to have its consequences. So you're going to have all sorts of forces that were guarding your ultimate boon that are going to be coming after your heroes. Now, this is often a chase. And it's a fantastic life and death chase. So Act 3 is often marked by a delightful of any kind. Foot chase, chase with starfighters, chase on horses, dragon running you down, whatever works for you. In Star Wars, Millennium Falcon's fleeing the Death Star. The Imperial forces don't just go, gosh, they got away, right? Fleets of TIE fighters are sent out to go kick their butt. Meanwhile, their hyperdrive's been disabled. So now you've got a life and death chase where the Millennium Falcon is in danger of being pulverized because it can't get away, and it's not really designed for this kind of business anyway. So you've got the guys in the turrets and Chewie working on the hyperdrive, and then finally it all comes together. Woo! We're away. Obi-Wan coming back. There, it's a little less dramatic, but they have to break through the Trade Federation's blockade. So they get there, and they've got to get to Naboo, but you've got an army of vulture droids between you and that. That's not going to be easy. With Revan, they've got to break through the Sith lines guarding the Star Forge and the field that crashes ships to even get there. Now, rescue from without. After the flight, at some point, the hero, so when the hero started, he needed guidance from a mentor to be given the appropriate information and be set on the path so that he would be armed to deal with the forces ahead. Now, at this point, the hero often needs some help because you've gone and stirred up all, I'm not going to say it, the hornet's nest, the storm, and now you've got to get out of it. And oftentimes you're going to need somebody going poke, poke, poke. So in Star Wars, strangely, Darth Vader is actually the mentor that helps out. The reason that the Millennium Falcon gets away is because they put a tracking beacon on it and he wants it to go home. So they make it look like they're going to kick their butt and it's all just a ruse. So Darth Vader is actually the savior there, strangely enough. The Gungans are Obi-Wan's rescue in Phantom Menace. In order for the small band of Naboo security volunteers and Jedi to infiltrate the palace, capture Nute Gunray, and free the Nabooians, they need the Gungan army to draw out the Trade Federation's army. So they're getting help from without, and they got that whole scene where they've got to come and beg the Naboo for help, or beg the Gungans for help, whether or not you like the Gungans. We won't get into that here. Revan, yeah, that was it? Just one. Revan, for example, receives his rescue from the Rakatans that are on the planet below the Star Forge, who still hold to the old ways. They help him disarm the field that prevents the ships from getting to the Star Forge. Otherwise, Revan would be SOL. So again, help from without in some way. Now you're crossing the return threshold. Just as you cross the threshold to get out, you're returning one to come back. Now you're returning from the special world. You must cross it. Just as you cross the threshold to get to the special world, the hero must cross the threshold to get back. Now this is often difficult for the hero, as he is returning to the ordinary world and must accept it as the place he belongs, just as we discovered. Again, just as we discussed, as in Star Wars, it manifests differently. Luke Skywalker having to accept being a fighter pilot. Obi-Wan having to accept being a Jedi Knight. Revan having to accept you're not a general, you're just a foot soldier. Similar to the refusal of the call. No, we just discussed that, sorry. Then we move to the Master of Two Worlds, step 17. Your hero ultimately triumphs in the end because the hero learns how to master both the world inside him and the world outside him. The lessons of the ordinary world with the special world, the material world and the spirit world. During this climax, the hero reaches a new understanding of himself and the things around him and his place in them. So this is the point where our hero finally starts to take everything that happens and internalize it and transform it into one new being. Luke begins to use the Force in the trenches of the Death Star. Obi-Wan masters his fear of facing Darth Maul. Revan masters himself, balancing the light side he is with the dark side he was. And this naturally moves, this new understanding and mastery naturally leads the hero to freedom. And we call this step 18 the freedom to live. The hero's he now has the freedom to live because the hero is no longer afraid of failure, because he actually has the tools to maybe be able to succeed, and the hero has faced death and is no longer afraid of dying. So you remove the fear of failure, you remove the fear of death, and now the hero is living in a world of complete freedom to act, to do what needs to be done, whatever needs to be done. Luke, by pulling everything together, use the Force, Luke, launches a photon torpedo into the tiny vent and blows the Death Star to hell. Obi-Wan conquers his fear and baits Darth Maul into thinking he's defeated as he's hanging there on the edge of the pit, and then launches up and cuts Darth Maul in half on his way back up. And then, to which Darth Maul has that expression of, oh. Revan rejects his old ways and destroys Darth Malak in the Star Forge, which is very poetic because in the end, Revan is bringing the end to the thing that he built, the Sith Empire. And then at that point, you're done. You've completed everything that needs to be done. You've conquered the ultimate foe. The heroes have reached whatever level it is they needed to reach to overcome the grand threats ahead of them. And after that, it's just wrap up. You're dealing with whatever wrap up you need to. Your subplots should be wrapped up by this point, but you may have, the Star Wars movies are great. You have your final climax and they get out like that. But if you're running a game, odds are you're not going to want to just get out like that. You're going to have a nice cool down period where your characters are addressing what happened. What are the consequences? You're going to definitely want to assess where your place in the world is now. All those kind of things, but it's an idea to rest up, to get everything wrapped up to a point where you can then thrust your characters or your setting or whatever into the next cycle of adventure. There just has to be that moment where you give everybody a breather. Otherwise, you just get to a point where you're like, I don't know if you've ever played a game where the GM just goes and goes and goes, and finally one day you're like, enough, I'm having panic attacks. So that encompasses the hero's journey from stem to stern in its most base elements to be used. Now, as you can see from the interpretations, you can make that apply however you need to, right? You don't have to go with the strict interpretations. Like apotheosis doesn't just have to be, I face death, there's a death thing. It could be the death of an aspect of your personality. It could be, your hero may have to overcome arrogance, for example, which has been but it has to be important, like the arrogance has been a survival trait. Like Han Solo, as his story goes along, part of what happens in him is a part of him dies so that he can be reborn. So you can be subtle in your ways and execute it however you want, but if you're sticking to these beats and you're sticking to this structure, it'll flow. And by the time you get to the end, your heroes, your characters, whoever, will be like, yes, we earned that. That was awesome. It was epic. It hit all of the strokes. I'm transformed. Let's go. I am unfortunately out of time. I could talk some more, but I do want to hit on a few aspects of heroes quick, just in terms of like creating characters and how they act inside of the setting. So heroes are, they're special people. They're not just ordinary. I mean, they start out ordinary, but heroes are people who accept the call. And first and foremost, they're the people that put their lives on the line for other people, for the good of their community, for people that they love, whatever. Neo's a great example of a hero who could care less about the community, but he puts his life on the line for the woman he loves. You look at Superman, he's willing to put his life on the line for people he doesn't know, aliens, mice, whatever. Now, the most important element of heroes, and this is a wonderful thing to go into characters in games, is that heroes are people who take action. Okay? Contemplation can be action if it is along the routes of going somewhere. For example, Gandalf in the beginning of The Lord of the Rings does a bunch of research to make sure, oh my God, this is the one true ring. Okay? He's taking action. It's not like I went out and I ran here and then I vanquished this foe or whatever, but it was doing something. Characters are ultimately doers, not beers. Heroes live on the razor's edge. Your heroes are, in my opinion, heroes are lame if they're not on the razor's edge. If your heroes are living inside of a delightful comfort zone, behind, in the bunker commanding the troops, far from the lines, they're not heroes. They're people telling people what to do. Heroes get out there and they mix it up. And they're not afraid to face death. And they do it on a regular basis. Bombs and nails, that's what you have for breakfast when you're a hero. In the audience's view into the story, there's always something that we can identify with in our heroes, and this goes the same with creating characters or helping your group create characters, is that there has to be a human element to them. There are things about heroes that are universal. You can identify with the fact that your hero is this and this and this, but your hero also has a troubled childhood, or your hero has an unrequited love, or your hero wrestles with feelings of inadequacy or insecurity. Those things are things that your heroes become larger than life. But we identify with them because we have some of the same problems that they have. Luke Skywalker is a whiny kid who isn't sure of himself. Okay? When I was a teenager, I was a whiny kid who was unsure of himself. Some people will argue that never changed. But the point is that's something that we can identify with. Neo is antisocial. Neo has always felt like he doesn't fit in. Especially, I'm sure gamers, we've all at some point felt like we didn't fit in. Again, a trait that we can all get to. And most importantly, heroes are not perfect. I've run into, over the years, a lot of people that they want to have their characters in their games be just smooth as glass. Heroes, you got to have some sort of understandable flaw, or, again, you can't identify with your hero. Neo's antisocial. He's kind of rude. And if you look at his apartment, he's kind of dirty. Cool, right? Luke Skywalker. Well, he's got all kinds of flaws. We just listed several of them. But you can get into it and you get it. Han Solo, again, right? You get, after you get into him, why he is selfish. Why he is, screw the world. Okay? Now, despite their universal characteristics, despite the fact that we can identify them with them, heroes are always separate. There's something in their destiny that sets them apart. Neo, again, we can go back to. There's something in his destiny as this gifted coder that sets him apart from the world. Luke Skywalker, yes, he's a farm boy, but there's something in him that yearns for something more. There's a spirit of adventure in him, and therefore he can't really fit in his environment. Sacrifice is also always essential to heroism. Heroes must always give something of themselves, something that they love, or simply suffer in mind, body, and soul to overcome the odds that are ahead of them. So in whatever's going on in your adventure or your story, heroes gotta have sacrifices. If it's just, I go from here to here to here, yay, then it's not earned. There's got to be something that the hero gives to get. As the heroes grow, they change. And this is something that in role-playing games we can often miss. Yes, our characters change. We got a new level. Okay, I got some new skill points. Oh, great, I got a new power. Okay, character sheets change all the time. That's part of gaming. But the fundament of the hero has to change. Personality, goals, what they're up to, look even. Those all are things that are in constant flux as the character encounters these things that force change in him. And then that's it. That pretty much covers it. If you remember those points, you'll be able to create a hero that will fit inside of that mythic journey, and you'll have tales that will be like, woo-woo. So does anybody have any questions? Did I munch anything up with something unclear? Yeah, go ahead.
I guess my biggest question when it comes to role-playing games is you usually have a group, not just one hero. And most of the examples you're giving me, like I would have a hard time convincing players to play anyone in Star Wars other than Han or Luke. I know very few people who would be like, I want to be the big hairy guy who never talks.
Most people don't want to be R2-D2.
Yeah.
Although I actually have some players that would be.
I actually wouldn't mind either, but a lot of the people I'm with them.
Right. Are you a game master or are you a player?
I've done both.
Okay. So as a game master then, we look at something like we can get Battlestar Galactica, Fellowship of the Ring, Lord of the Rings, we can go Star Wars, whatever. They're ensemble casts, right? Which is exactly what a role-playing game is. You've got a group of dudes who are going out to do it. As a game master, it's your responsibility to help your players so that they all feel like Luke and Han, right? If you dump those characters on a table, actually, you know exactly which ones you're going to choose, right? So what you got to do is work with your players so that they all feel like they're that. And that they all have those transformations and that they overcome them as a group. Lord of the Rings is an excellent example. I mean, those characters continue to grow and change and reach new heights all together, as opposed to it's just about Frodo, right? It's also all of the hobbits grow and change and become heroes. Aragorn, ditto. So, if you put down the Lord of the Rings, the Fellowship, it might be a different story. They might not be, I only want to play Gandalf or I want to play Aragorn. Somebody might be, I want to be Frodo. Of course, people probably wouldn't want to be Samwise again, but, there you go. Does that make sense? Did that help?
No, it makes sense. It just makes things a lot harder to have everyone go through the journey like that. Like, even in Lord of the Rings, I would say Gimli and doesn't necessarily, he changes, but he doesn't.
It does increase in difficulty the more players you have. I mean, if you've got 8 players, what you may have to do is say, okay, this story arc, you guys are the ones that are going to be the central figures. Next story arc, you guys are the central figures. Next story arc, you guys are the central figures. So everybody's getting their due. They just might not be getting it all at the same exact time. You still got to be throwing out all the kudos to all the players and making sure that they don't feel like they're being ignored. But that may be a way to do it. Is not have everybody be center stage all the time. Now, you know your group dynamics far better than I, and you may not have players that are willing to share the spotlight like that, in which case, there's some adaptation that you'll have to do. Again, it's just all structure to try on. Try it. See what works with your players. If this isn't working with your players, ditch it, because it's all about having fun in the end, right? Why be slave to structure if your players aren't having fun, right? So do whatever works for you. Take the pieces that do work for your group so that everybody's enjoying themselves. Is that cool? And I'll be happy to talk to you more about this afterwards. We're just starting to run over. So these articles are also supposed to be published by Wizards of the Coast, although in the Star Wars Online, I have no idea whether or not they're doing that. I have to get in touch with somebody. If not, I will be happy to take down people's email addresses if you want crib notes or anything like that. I'll be happy to email them to you. Just meet me at the Catalyst. It's table 19 in the board game room. It's just around the corner. So I want to thank you guys for all coming and sitting and listening attentively, and you guys were an awesome audience. And thank you for allowing me to talk.